Welcome, students, to the fifth module where we focus on human variation. Sometimes this can be left near the end of the course once we finally get to the fossil record and all of the creatures that contributed to us and the evolutionary history of our species, Homo sapiens. But I like to talk about human variation now because it might get you a little more interested in this class. And the second part of the course, we move to primates, and then we get to talk about the fossils. But we're talking about genetics and inheritance, and it's probably just as important to, dive into it now and talk about human variation. And at the very simplest level, we can talk about both variation in genotype and phenotype, now that we know that terminology and generally the mechanisms that generate them. We can understand human variation in terms of polymorphism, as well as types of variation that we not only say in humans, but that we see across many different species. What makes us different? That's always an important question. Now we can talk about what makes animals different in general, but we're focusing on humans. What makes us different both in genotype and phenotype? You can see that we have a number of different phenotypes of hair and eye color, a number of different variations in the texture of our hair. We could talk about a variation in our skin pigmentation. These are obvious things that make us different, right? And we look different in this way. Well, what are the mechanisms that generate this variation? Well, at the root source, we need to understand what a polymorphism is, both in genotype and phenotype. Remember, genotype is what's on the genes. Do you have a dominant gene on this chromosome, or is it recessive? What do your pairs of chromosome look like? An important question to ask is it Mendelian inheritance, where it's just one gene responsible for one physical trait, or is it multiple genes responsible for one physical trait or another type of inheritance? And of course, phenotype is the manifestation of those genes, and also a little bit of interaction from the environment. Totally possible to show us what you look like in terms of your genotype, the physical traits. That's the phenotype, right? So let's talk about what a polymorphism is in both of those components. So a polymorphism can be looked at both in genotype and phenotype. Slightly different, but same basic concept. Poly means many, morph means shape or size, something that can be recorded. So a polymorphism in phenotype is when at least you have two or more, right? We can think of maybe the colors of flowers. As long as there are two colors, we can say that color as a trait in this flower is polymorphic. There's at least two. There can be more. If it's only one trait, let's say, it's just one species of flower and they're all purple and that's it. That's monomorphic. You can think of lavender, right? Lavender bush creates a flower and it's all purple, monomorphic. Think about it. That's carved out by natural selection. It's been fixed. All of the lavender bushes and flowers are all purple. And there can be exceptions. When you think about it in genotype, that means on the genes, it has to be at least some variation at one point on the gene. You may have noticed in one of the labs, particularly the specific one looking at lab 2, cell replication and protein synthesis. When you create a protein, you need to link a bunch of amino acids together. You may have noticed that there are multiple ways to make the same amino acid. So that means there's variation in the nucleic basis, even on individuals that make the same amino acid or the same protein. And so that alone is polymorphic, right? Just the very fact that you can have of this variation there and in multiple individuals. If you look at the diagram on the far right with the two chromosomes on both sides and showing you kind of like a part or locus on each one of those chromosomes and zooming in on the actual information, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, because that's what you're seeing. And you notice that it is all the same. The sequences are the same except for one spot where there is a T on the pink chromosome and there's a G on the blue chromosome. What does that mean? Well, that's typically known as a SNP, or abbreviated as SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism. One change, one difference. That's it, right? You can have multiple ones on the same gene, but this is just one single change. And we can focus on a number of them. When we look at the DNA of humans, right? When we can do this. When we sample the DNA of modern humans, modern human groups, we sample DNA if we can extract it from ancient skeletons. But what we've noticed is when we look at the number of SNPs, the number of single nucleotide polymorphic differences across human genomes, across major human groups, it looks like humans only show 28% polymorphic loci. That means that 72% we are the same genetically, every single nucleic base. And the 28%, why is it different? Well, that's maybe some of the slight differences we see in major human groups from different continents. It may also mean that there are parts of our genome that have asked for, flexibility so that we can adapt to our environments in the future. It's important to emphasize the types of variation that you see in organisms at the population level, of course, and there also is some individualized component here with variation. So when you look at population level, we usually parse it up into adaptive and non-adaptive. So something is adaptive, that's natural selection, right? It's something that is really important. It allows an organism to thrive in the environment, and then you'll see almost in a few generations, every organism in that species has that trait. I mean, you look at this, I think it's a grasshopper in the right-hand upper right corner. Their wing covers are made to look like a leaf, so they can look camouflage on a branch or on a tree, so that other predators like birds or so don't come and eat them. There are other non-adaptive traits that will evolve, and these can be, these ones don't really, that we know of, have any bearing on whether an organism competes better in the environment with one of these traits or lack thereof. So these are ones that are accumulated through genetic drift, through migration, right? Random changes, right? It's non-adaptive. The example I have here on the left-hand side is a picture of a human skull. It's focusing on right at the area of the nose and the eye orbits on each side. Some people actually have retained some of these lines on our skulls, like the metopic suture that splits your frontal into two halves. And some of you, everybody has a notch, some type of feature that's on the top of your eye orbit. You might be able to feel it. It's just on the top of your eye orbit. There's a little bit of notch. It's a little bit closer to the bridge of your nose. Some of you, of course you can feel this, but some of you actually have a notch. Some of you actually have a foramen that is a complete hole of bone where the blood vessels go through. We can't necessarily tell with the naked eye and the flesh on you whether you have a notch or a foramen. And of course, what does that mean? It doesn't really confer any advantage that we know of in the environment. And so this is just, variation that accumulates. That's basically just random. Unless we find out that it has some type of advantage, which is possible, can happen. Individual level adaptation, right? How I said, people just don't evolve, right? Populations do. Individuals are agents within that. Now, there's something known as acclimatization. This is where you physiologically adapt to an environment, and it's usually very temporary. So this is things like heat adaptation, we also have slight adaptations for altitude, right? If you go up to higher altitude, your body will acclimatize to that environment and the thin air, and actually will produce more red blood cells and larger lung capacity, so you actually can survive in that type of environment.